In a mostly unknown museum in the far west of Paris sits one of the most remarkable collections of photographs in the world. Unlike most early 20th century photographs, the vast majority of the images were taken in color. The archive, made up of 72,000 color autochrome photographs, the largest collection of its kind in the world, 4,000 stereographic images, and approximately 183,000 meters, or about 100 hours, of 35mm black and white silent film, in addition to a small amount of color film, owes its existence to a French financier who in 1909, with his substantial fortune, decided to embark on an ambitious project, to photograph as much of the planet as possible. This is how Albert Kahn photographed the world. Born Abraham Kahn in 1860 Alsace-Lorraine, his family was forced to move further west once the Germans occupied the territory during the Franco-Prussian War in 1871. When he was 16, he moved to Paris, changed his name to Albert, and started his career. He worked himself up from an assistant at a bank to becoming an associate, and, quote, in only a few years, from 1889 to 1893, he built up a fortune by speculating first on gold and diamond mines in South Africa. In parallel, he collaborated with a banking syndicate on industrial projects or international loans. Suffice to say, Albert Kahn did extremely well for himself and started his own bank in 1898. In 1897, he started donating his time and money to more philanthropic work. While some rich 19th century individuals would donate their fortunes to starting libraries such as Andrew Carnegie, Kahn wanted to promote a better understanding of the world. Thus, in 1898, with Les Bourses de Voyage autour du Monde, given to the Université de Paris, which granted financing, after competitive exam, to young academic specialists so that they could travel for 15 months in a foreign country and truly come into contact with life. In Kahn's own words, consequently, our foundations designed, started, or carried out since 1897 were all meant to record universal activity in order to release the mind and, moreover, thanks to the documentation thus compiled, guide the aspirations of humankind. Since it wasn't feasible for everyone to travel the world, this altruistic mission to connect the world in an era of burgeoning but still limited transportation eventually evolved into numerous photographic expeditions. Thus, the quest to send out photographers to take images and bring the world back to Paris was born. I would like to put stereoscopic photography, screenings in the cinematograph, to work on a large scale in order to capture, once and for all, the aspects, practices, and conditions of human activity whose fatal disappearance is no longer only a matter of time. The project is a record of living humanity at the beginning of the 20th century, at the critical hour of one of the most thorough economic, geographic, and historic transformations we have ever seen. In some sense, from our 21st century vantage point, taking a photographic record of the entire planet can almost seem quaint in its aims. Having access to Google Images and Google Earth, we can instantly see anywhere on the planet, as well as the luxury of being able to easily capture 10,000 plus images on devices that fit into our pocket without specialized equipment or knowledge. With that, it's a bit hard to appreciate the ambition of wanting to do this in 1908. When Kahn decided to embark on this project in the early 1900s, it is important to recognize where exactly photography was as a technology. Being French, he used two recent and complementary Lumiere brother inventions, the cinematograph, invented in 1895, and the autochrome, invented in 1907, the first recording movement and the second color. Starting with the cinematograph motion picture system, this was essentially a portable movie camera, although the clips were extremely short. This technology was still new enough that the clips produced were closer to the Lumiere brothers' famous train arriving at the station as compared to, say, Metropolis. In addition, and probably more impressively and interestingly for this video, at least in my opinion, was Kahn's choice to use the Lumiere brothers' other recent invention, the autochrome system, for still photography, or more fully, the Lumiere autochrome. For an in-depth science and chemistry explanation on how they managed to create color images at the very start of the 20th century, I refer you to the Technology Connections video on the subject. You should check that after you watch this video, of course, but it is super interesting and I highly recommend. Now, the Lumiere brothers were not the first to invent color photography, but their system was one of the first commercially successful color photography systems. Its relative ease, not really by modern standards, as they were still hucking large cameras and glass plates around, plus the obvious advantage of color are what made Kahn's project possible in the first place. The positive color plates created by the autochrome process during this project is what makes these images so unique, as we are conditioned to think of the first half of the 20th century in black and white. Now that we have covered some of the more technical aspects of how the photos were actually taken, next it is probably important to discuss logistically how we planned on photographing the planet, which even today would still be considered a large undertaking if one started from scratch. As a wealthy Parisian banker, he obviously wasn't going to go out and take all these photos himself, although his own world-traveling exploits are what inspired the project. Over, quote, the archive's 2 decades, Kahn employed 11 independent cameramen and photographers, as well as the pioneering biologist Dr. Jean Commandant, to record and collect life, understood in the social, philosophical, and biological sense of the term, in over 40 countries. Kahn's cameramen amassed a vast, multimedia, ethnogeographic visual inventory of the globe made up of 72,000 color autochrome photographs, the largest collection of its kind in the world, 4,000 stereographic images, and approximately 183,000 meters, or about 100 hours, of 35mm black and white silent film, in addition to a small amount of color film. The first person Kahn hired to go take pictures wasn't even a photographer. He was Kahn's chauffeur. In 1908, Alfred, aka Albert du Tertre, was basically just handed a ton of camera equipment and then shipped off to Asia. He managed to take thousands of images. After the first expedition, it became more professionalized, with Kahn hiring actual photographers, which makes a lot of sense considering it was a lot more technically involved than it is now, so props to the chauffeur, honestly. In 1909, Auguste Lyon became the first professional photographer hired by Albert Kahn. Probably one of the most respected of the photographers from this project, his photos are recognized for their technical mastery. Contemporary members of the archive project called him a genuine artist. He would work for the archive for 20 years. Some of his trips included Egypt, the Balkans, Turkey, Greece, Italy, Scandinavia, actually accompanied by Kahn, Spain, Switzerland, and of course, all over France. Stéphane Passé was hired in 1912 for photography and cinematography missions. In just 2 years, he visited China and Mongolia twice, Japan, Turkey, Morocco, and India for the project. When the Great War started, he served in the artillery section, but still worked on the project. Consequently, he photographed Paris in 1914 and several departments between 1915 and 1917. After the war, he would work on and off for Kahn. Frédéric Gadmer was the most prolific photographer among Kahn's hired hands, taking over 20,000 pictures. After having served with the Section photographique et cinématographique des armées, he would join Kahn in 1919. His journeys alone would take him around the world. From a first trip to Syria, Lebanon, Turkey, and Palestine, and again on a return trip in 1921. He took further trips to Iraq, Persia, Afghanistan, Dahomey, Algeria, Tunisia, and Canada, as well as parts of Europe. It is easy to see that when he left Kahn in 1932, how he was able to take 20,000 pictures, as he had 13 years, and many different places to take them in. Another photographer hired after the war in 1918 was Lucien Lesson. Before the war, he had worked on news films, and then during the war, he worked also for the Section photographique et cinématographique des armées. Until 1923, he would film movies for Kahn before going to work for Pathé News. These are just some of the photographers who were hired by Kahn to participate for this project. And I've listed just some of the more interesting ones, not to say the others aren't interesting, but some of the more prolific and interesting ones just to give you a taste of the people working for Kahn. These photographers on their many long voyages captured, quote, a kind of photographic inventory of the surface of the globe occupied and organized by man, such as it presents itself at the beginning of the 20th century. If one wanted to see the images in the early 20th century, a 1920 Cine Club newspaper gives us an idea of what it was like. A cinema museum. Though little spoken of, this museum exists and already stores within its cabinets an impressive number of kilometers of film, especially documentary films on social life. The creation of this museum is the work of the generous patron Monsieur K. It is installed in a magnificent park in Boulogne-sur-Seine. Up until now, the museum has been private property but will return to the state after the death of the founder. October 1st, 1920. Now, I was unable to figure out if anyone could just show up to the museum, but the website does say, and when I was at the museum, they did mention that Kahn would organize regular screenings of the works at the museum during his lifetime. Now, whether people had to make an appointment or how it was practically done, I'm unsure. But in addition to museum showings, Professor Jean Brunez, the director of the Archives program, used the projection plates for use in his geographical lectures at the Collège de France, which were open to the public, which were apparently one of the main uses for the projection plates. Shortly after the founding of the project, a major world event took place, World War I. Along with documenting cultural events and people going about their daily lives and historical monuments throughout the world, having started in 1908 in France, the project quickly ran into the First World War. Throughout the war and in the immediate aftermath, Kahn would direct his photographers to document the destruction and the horror the war had brought to northern France. Over 17,000 war scenes were captured. Although it is worth noting there was none of actual combat, at least as far as I'm aware of. It's usually the aftermath. On a lighter note, the vast majority of the photos were of gentler subjects: architecture, nature, art, religion, être humain, to be human, and commerce. Let's say a more positive view of humanity. Unfortunately for Kahn and the project, as most of his wealth was based on speculative finance and banking, when the stock market crashed in 1929, Kahn's great wealth was wiped out. This effectively ended the Archives project, as Kahn could no longer afford to send photographers around the world. So what happened to his museum and now enormous collection of film and glass plates? In 1936, the local French government bought the entire property along with its equipment and collections. This is how it eventually became a public museum. It does seem as if this was Kahn's initial intention anyway, but the crash accelerated the process and the project fell into the public's hands before his death. As part of the sale, Kahn was allowed to continue to live on the premises until his death in 1940. Today, the museum persists, although in a different form than it originally did. In 2015, construction began on a new visitor center and a permanent exhibition space at the corner of the property, modernizing and reviving the museum. While I am not normally one for ultra-modern buildings anywhere near anything old, i.e. the rest of the grounds of the museum, in this instance, it actually works quite well. If you're ever in Paris, I encourage you to head to this forgotten little section in the west of the city. I would highly recommend visiting when the gardens are in bloom, as the museum is not just celebrated for its photographic collection, but for the beautiful gardens planted by Albert Kahn.